On May 8th, 1945, Winston Churchill stood on a balcony, soaking in the cheers of a nation that saw him as a hero. He was a global icon, the face of defiance, the man who had stared down tyranny. His approval rating was a staggering 83%. Less than 3 months later, he was out of a job. The man who took his place was his complete opposite. Quiet, unassuming, and famously dismissed by Churchill himself as a modest man with much to be modest about. That man was Clement Attlee. And while Churchill had been busy winning the war, Attlee had been quietly planning the peace. Over the next 6 years, this soft-spoken politician would lead one of the most radical, transformative governments in British history. He would build the Britain we know today, creating institutions that millions still rely on. This is the story of the man who created the National Health Service, kicked off the end of the British Empire, and shaped a modern nation, and why you've probably heard so little about him. The problem: a broken Britain. To understand the revolution that was coming, you have to picture Britain in 1945. Yes, the country was victorious, but it was also completely broke and utterly exhausted. It was a nation haunted by the ghosts of the past and terrified of the future. Financially, Britain was bankrupt, surviving on American loans and Marshall Plan aid just to keep the lights on. Its cities, London, Coventry, Liverpool, bore the deep physical scars of the Blitz. But the damage ran deeper than rubble and debt. The war had thrown the massive inequalities of British society into sharp relief. The 1930s, the Hungry 30s, were a fresh, painful memory of mass unemployment and grim poverty. The soldiers coming home and the families who had endured the Blitz weren't just hoping for a return to normal. They were demanding something better. They had fought a war for a new world, and they refused to go back to the old one. This hunger for change was given a name and a blueprint. In 1942, a civil servant named William Beveridge published a report that identified 5 giant evils holding the country back: want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. The Beveridge Report wasn't just a government document. It became a runaway bestseller, a promise to slay these giants and build a new society that would care for its citizens from the cradle to the grave. It was debated in pubs, factories, and homes across the country. As the 1945 election approached, the question wasn't just who could win the war, but who could build the peace. The public wanted a builder, not just a bulldog. The shock of 1945. The general election in July 1945 was the first in a decade. Churchill, riding high on his status as a war hero, ran a surprisingly clumsy campaign. In a radio broadcast, he disastrously suggested that a Labour government would need some form of Gestapo to implement its socialist policies. The comment backfired spectacularly. The public looked at Clement Attlee, who had served loyally as Churchill's deputy prime minister throughout the war, and saw anything but a would-be tyrant. Labour's manifesto, titled "Let Us Face the Future," offered a clear, bold vision. It was a direct promise to tackle those 5 giants with concrete plans for full employment, a national health service, and the nationalisation of key industries. When the results came in on July 26, after a short delay to count the votes of soldiers serving overseas, the world was stunned. Labour hadn't just won, it had won in a landslide, securing a massive majority of 146 seats. The great wartime leader was out. As soon as the result was clear, Churchill went to Buckingham Palace to resign. Minutes later, his replacement, Clement Attlee, arrived, chauffeured by his wife in their modest family car, to be asked by King George VI to form a new government. Attlee was the definition of an unlikely radical. Born into a comfortable middle-class family, he was a lawyer by training and a decorated major from the First World War. Uncharismatic and a man of few words, he was the very picture of quiet competence. There's a limerick, sometimes said to be written by Attlee himself, that sums him up perfectly. There were few who thought him a starter, / many who thought themselves smarter. / but he ended PM, CH and OM, / an Earl and a Knight of the Garter. But behind that quiet exterior was a core of steel and a deep socialist conviction, forged during his time as a social worker in London's poverty-stricken East End. This quiet man was about to unleash a political earthquake. The architect at work, slaying the giants. The Attlee government didn't hang about. Between 1945 and 1951, it launched one of the most ambitious legislative blitzes in modern history, completely reshaping the relationship between the British people and the state. First, they went after want and idleness. To rebuild the shattered economy and prevent a return to the dull queues of the 30s, the government took huge chunks of the economy into public ownership. The Bank of England, coal mines, railways, electricity, gas, and the steel industry were all nationalised. All told, about 20% of the entire British economy was brought under state control to plan the recovery and guarantee full employment. To fight squalor, they launched a massive programme to build council houses and passed the New Towns Act of 1946, creating brand new communities from scratch. To battle ignorance, they put the 1944 Education Act into practice, making secondary education free for all and opening up opportunities for a whole generation of children. But the crown jewel, the policy that would become something of a national religion, was the assault on disease. On July 5, 1948, the National Health Service was born. Championed by the fiery Minister for Health, Aneurin Bevan, the NHS was revolutionary. For the first time in any Western country, every single person in Britain, man, woman and child, was entitled to the full range of medical care, completely free at the point of use. From a doctor's visit to a dental checkup, from a new pair of spectacles to life-saving surgery, healthcare was now a right of citizenship, not a privilege of wealth. It was, and remains, the most popular and enduring legacy of the Attlee years. The end of an empire. While this social revolution was raging at home, an equally profound transformation was happening abroad. Churchill was a passionate, almost romantic, believer in the British Empire. Attlee was a pragmatist. He looked at the balance sheet and saw the truth. The age of empire was over. Britain, exhausted and bankrupt, simply could not afford to hold on to its vast global territories. The biggest, most seismic step was the independence of India. In 1947, after centuries of British rule, the Indian Independence Act was passed, creating the two new sovereign nations of India and Pakistan. It was a messy, complex, and tragically violent moment, scarred by the horrors of partition. But it was also the undeniable beginning of the end for the British Empire. In the years that followed, Attlee's government also oversaw independence for Burma, now Myanmar, and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. This quiet decolonization, driven more by grim necessity than grand speeches, redrew the world map and redefined Britain's place in it forever. The legacy and the cost. The achievements of the Attlee government were monumental, but they came at a huge cost. This wasn't a golden age of prosperity, it was the age of austerity. Creating the welfare state was incredibly expensive, and Britain's economy was still on its knees. Wartime rationing continued long after the fighting stopped. It was even extended to things like bread, which hadn't been rationed during the war. For many, life was grey, drab, and difficult. By 1950, the government was running on fumes, and its huge majority was slashed to just a handful of seats. In 1951, Attlee called another election and was narrowly defeated, even though Labour actually won more of the popular vote than the Conservatives. Winston Churchill, the man so dramatically kicked out 6 years earlier, returned to 10 Dowling Street. But he didn't, and couldn't, undo what Attlee had built. The NHS, the welfare state, and the mixed economy had become so central to British life that they were the new normal. It created a post-war consensus that both parties would stick to for the next 30 years. The story of Clement Attlee is a powerful reminder that history isn't always made by the loudest person in the room. If you enjoyed this story of Britain's unsung architect, give this video a like and subscribe for more hidden histories. And let us know in the comments, what part of Attlee's legacy do you think is most important today? Conclusion. Winston Churchill is rightly remembered as the man who won the war, but Clement Attlee is the man who won the peace. His legacy isn't found in dramatic wartime speeches or iconic photographs. It's found in the quiet, everyday fabric of modern Britain. It's in the council houses that sheltered a nation, the pensions that offered security, and above all, in the National Health Service, a system that remains a cherished, defining feature of the United Kingdom. Even his great ideological opponent, Margaret Thatcher, who dismantled much of the post-war consensus, had to admit that Attlee was all substance and no show, and a genuinely radical and reforming leader. He was the quiet revolutionary, the modest man who did more to build his country than perhaps any other single figure. He is the politician who built modern Britain, and his is a story that deserves to be remembered.